and the way that the Buddha taught, and how compassionate and caring and wise he was, and the way he would get people on board by, instead of saying, well, this is the way it is, he'd ask them a question, or he'd say, well, that's not the way we think about it in this tradition, or in this, that it's the noble one's discipline. That's not how we think of it. And then the person can ask, well, how do you think of it? Or how do you see it? And then the Buddha has this permission, really the buy-in. He's always like finding ways to get people interested in buying into what it is. He doesn't just like, give people a piece of his mind. and we're not allowed to either. This request of the Dhammas, we're not supposed to just walk up to someone and tell them about our great teacher and our teachings. It's really there for people to inquire about, which means they've already signed up. It's a very important part of it. But it's really beautiful to look at how the Buddha did that. Even with people who came and were super angry with him. There's a series of suttas. I haven't looked at it recently, so I'm not sure quite how accurate I'll be, probably close. There's a series of suttas where one of the members of a big clan comes to the Buddha, and he becomes inspired and he ordains. And then another, actually, I guess he starts out angry too, if I remember. He's got some bone to pick with the Buddha about what he's doing, and the Buddha explains to him and convinces him and shows him the Dhamma, and he is really inspired by that, and he decides to ordain. So he becomes a monk. And then another relative hears about this, and he's really angry that his relative went and became a monk. So he comes and he's blasting the Buddha. And this one you might have heard of, I don't know, but the Buddha says, after, the Buddha's just sitting there, and this guy is just really hauling off on him, and the Buddha says, so do you ever have guests over at your house? I mean, this is not what this guy was expecting to hear, right? Calmly. Do you ever have visitors? And he's like, well, yes. Do you give them food? Oh no. Do they bring you gifts? Is that how it goes? Yeah. Do they bring you gifts? Well, what if you don't accept their gifts? Who do they belong to? He said, they're theirs. He said, I don't accept your gift of this berating. It belongs to you. And first the guy is really upset. He thinks the Buddha's cursing him. But then he talks to the Buddha, and the Buddha, continues to work with him, he starts to really see where the Buddha's coming from, and he gets inspired, and then he ordains. And then there's a third one that comes angry. Anyhow, you get the idea. And it's really quite lovely to see these stories repeated that have come down from, so long ago. And how many of you read the suttas some of you. And how many of you know about what the Nikayas are? Some of you may not. I didn't at first. I only had heard about the Dhammapada before I went to Thailand and was spending time at the International Monastery of Ajahn Chah with my son and the other monks. And then one of the friends of my son gave me a copy of the middle-length discourses. And it was like gold. It's one of, there's 4 different major volumes of Nikaya of suttas, and this one has all kinds of different ways of describing the Dhamma, involving different people, kings and nobles, and people with slaves, and people of all different walks of life, and coming to the Buddha with different questions and problems. The young woman who's recently married and actually her husband, I think, is the one who says, we're having so much trouble with her, she's so angry, and the Buddha talks to her about being married. And he said, you know, there are different ways that you can be in this relationship. You get to choose how you're going to be with it. And so she says, you know, the Buddha says you can be like a friend to this person, you can be like a servant to this person, you can be like a mother to this person, you can, you know, these are, and he talked about these different, you know, ways you can be like a slave. And he said, and she said, well, count me as the slave. I mean, she's living in ancient India where you get like, this is arranged, and she doesn't like it at all. And it's like, you know, but she can still hear the Dhamma. And I don't remember what happens to her. Do you? I think that was kind of like, wow, that's how it is for women sometimes in ancient India. How about here? The Buddha gave women ordination, and he even said, you know, come bhikkhuni, just like he did with men, come. And he even made a rule that, you know, there's a rule that you're not to ordain anyone younger than 20 years old. But he said, if a girl is married, you can ordain her as early as 12 years old. So he's giving this opportunity for women to be able, girls to be able to become free from that situation. They did need permission, and oftentimes when the Buddha, husbands would give their permission, and then the husbands would get inspired. And in one case, he decided to become a monk, and he freed everybody. It was all of the people in his household. He gave them all different kinds of ways to sustain themselves before he left. So there are these stories, these opportunities for us to look at, you know, how does this apply to our life? And some of them, of course, are much more easily translated into what we can use. You know, the ways in which the Buddha talked about friendship, for example. You know, like the importance of, you know, noticing if the friends we are with are really sincere or not. They're really morally grounded or not. And, you know, the ways in which we can train the mind. He talked about, you know, the doctrine, which can be really kind of very formal, but he also talked about application that can really give us the chance to shape our practice. The Buddha gave so many different methods for meditation and for living life that we can really look there to find what really is suitable for us at the time. So when we teach, we try to, well, we listen to people, and we do quite a lot of counseling, you could say. And then we often, we do invite people to tell us about the things they're interested in hearing about. And so we will, you know, really dig out the teachings, the things that happened at the time of the Buddha that would apply. And people find that helpful. I mean, it's like you can look at the issues that we may have, whether it's something with health or with a loss of livelihood, or with, you know, just any situation you can think of, and there'll be something there that's supportive in the suttas. for myself, I really wanted to know what the Buddha said, because we hear so many things attributed to the Buddha that really aren't from the Buddha. And I don't know if you've seen this website called Fake Buddha Quotes, but it's very helpful. Yeah, it is funny too. And to look at not just, I like the way that he does that. Do you know his name? I've forgotten what it is, but he investigates where the quote might be related, and how it got kind of altered or changed. And this is worth examining, because the Buddha was careful in the way he talked about things. He never oversteps what he knows. So there's like this series of suttas where he talks about no discoverable beginning. And, he doesn't say there's no beginning, but there's no discoverable beginning. In all of the eons that he could see past into his past lives, and how the world, the universes expand and contract and expand and contract. So he was all over the Big Bang Theory before any of the scientists ever got there. But it's like he couldn't see a beginning. So the thing that I like is he doesn't then assume there's no beginning. Oh, if I can't see it, it doesn't exist. He just says there's no discoverable beginning. And this is a good thing for us to notice in the way that we speak, and in the way that we think too, so that when we are when we know something, know where the limits of that knowledge are, and really say what we know and not go farther than that. So like someone was talking to us recently about saying that something that happened to them, like they were born in this particular family, and she said that was my karma. And the person listening is kind of like, I don't really buy that. What does that mean? And the suggestion we had was, what if you just said there were causes and conditions for this? It's very different than just like assuming this is the way karma worked in your history. And just things like that. I don't know, is this making any sense? Okay. It's like the care we take with being truthful, being accurate with what we know and what we share, really makes a difference in how reliable we are and how much people can trust what we say. So when we see the Buddha, I think it's amazing to notice, how he goes about things, how he talks to people. Do you have any suttas you think would be good to weave in here? Oh, Anguttara 9.5, the powers. So how many people were here this morning? Heard this story already? 2 or 3? Okay, sorry. This sutta was kind of a sleeper. I just ran across it teaching them about the Anguttara Nikaya, and I talk about it a lot because it's helpful for facing what we fear. So the sutta is entitled Powers, and it's about 4 powers and 5 fears. So the 5 fears you may be familiar with in your own life. I mean, have you ever been afraid of losing your livelihood? Or maybe becoming blamed by someone or getting a bad reputation? Or feeling uneasy in a group, in an assembly of people, like maybe timid or worried? or being afraid of dying, or being afraid of what might happen after you die. So the Buddha said that if you develop 4 powers, you never have to worry about those things. Those fears can go away. So usually when I get to this point, I say, do you want to know what they are? So that's a humorous kind of like sort of approach of the Buddha, right? It's like, do you want to hear? So the first one that the Buddha talks about is the power of wisdom. And wisdom is defined in different ways in the suttas. And in this case, he's talking about the wisdom of knowing what is wholesome and what is unwholesome. And for the Buddha, that's not a judgment of like what's okay, what's not okay. It's really about what brings more peace, more happiness, or what brings more suffering. And so he's always looking at results, not just an idea, he didn't make up a philosophy. The Buddha reported on his own experience. And so he talks about, well, we pretty much naturally know what's wholesome and unwholesome, blamable and blameless, leading to good results and leading to painful results. And so that wisdom is the wisdom he's talking about. And then he talks about energy. The next power is the power of energy. And the power of energy is the energy to really do what's going to lead to good results, do what's wholesome, and to avoid the unwholesome. And the third one is the power of blamelessness. So when we are living according to precepts, and everybody does some things that aren't perfect, of course, but in general, when we're living a wholesome ways, then we're blameless. Even if someone blames us for something, it's not true. So it's not something we need to worry about. And the fourth power, which was really a surprise to me when I read this, is the power of sustaining favorable relationships. And so what does that mean? How do you do that? And the Buddha actually laid it out clearly in that sutta and in a couple of other suttas. That the way to sustain relationships with people, and he said favorable ones, relationships with people that we trust and admire, relationships with people who are also have this intention to be wholesome and do good things. And they may excel in some particular way with their virtue or their generosity, but whatever it is that we know this is a good relationship to sustain, to develop, then the Buddha says there are 4 ways that you can do that. And noticing if some kind of gift would be beneficial to this person, then give them that gift. If you notice that some kind of encouraging words would be beneficial to them, encourage them with your words. If there's something you can do to help them that would be supportive, then do that. Be munificent, beneficial to them in that way. And then also treat people with a kind of impartiality that, one way to think of that is by being even in our temperament and with them, not nice to them one time and kind of off moody, in another time, but to be kind and generous with them all the time, and to also treat people in general with impartiality. So this addresses any kind of discrimination against people, and it addresses, like if you're teaching a group of people, or if you're, working with people, to treat them equally, treat them with impartiality. It brings a kind of confidence and trust. So when you look at those 4 powers and you see those 5 fears, you can get the sense that you don't have to have so much concern about, say, losing your livelihood. And usually when I talk about this, I refer back to the way I grew up on a farm in a small town of mostly farming people and local merchants, and people helped each other. They knew each other, they took care of each other in these ways of sustaining these relationships, and they helped each other. So one farmer got sick, and my dad planted the rest of his corn that year. And my dad got in an accident, and the other farmers came in and finished the harvest. And when my father died, my father always said, when I die, like 5 people are going to show up. Like no one's going to pay any attention. But actually, when he died, people were lined up out the funeral home and around the block to talk to my mom and to view the body. And people drove over from 4 states away. And it was because, and every person that came through had a story of something he had done for them. But he left sweet corn on my porch. He plowed out my driveway with his tractor. It's like constant. My mom turned to me and she said, "I didn't know he did that." Different things, and it was just really heartwarming. And this is sustaining relationships. When you really build a community and you are connected to each other, you don't have to be so afraid about these things that can happen to any of us, right? So you can see that, losing your livelihood, and you have a safety net to get you over the rough spots. There was a woman in Portland who got COVID, and the people she lived with wanted her to immediately move out. Not so great, huh? And in her spiritual community, the leader of the community had a recreational vehicle parked on their property, and she said, "You come stay here." And people from the community came, fed her, took care of her. It's beautiful. And this is what we can do with each other, especially in a community like this. And I hope we talk about this more later today. So sustaining favorable relationships can help with that. And of course, if we're really developing these powers, if you like, you can think of them as superpowers, wisdom, blamelessness, energy, that kind of energy. It's of course, we don't have to worry about getting a bad reputation. Even if someone accuses us, like I said, it goes nowhere. People accuse the Buddha, so it's not like we're going to go through life without being blamed for things. But it's not something we have to fear. And wherever we are, whatever group we're in, we can hold our head up. We can show up with confidence. Of course, then there's death and what comes after death. And that requires a certain development of understanding of cause and effect to really feel confident in that. And of course, sometimes, even though we, try our best to do all these things, we still have fears. We still have anxiety. We still worry about things. And at that stage, when we're doing, what we can, and also we have to be a little bit careful if you're kind of lean toward the perfectionist side of things, to develop a lot of kindness and generosity for ourselves and for others. We all do things that are not the best. To acknowledge that and learn from it and let it go. And when we're still feeling less than, anxious, worried about things, even though we're doing, all of these good things to our, what's possible at that point, at this point in our life, then I think really looking at developing more kindness and compassion, especially for ourselves, and noticing what's underneath those feelings. Can I see those feelings as impermanent, as not really belonging to me, as just being a conditioned phenomenon, so that we can see them outside of, me, as an object, as something we can observe, and that we can really understand them in context, so that they're not automatically perpetuated. And this is how we can work with whatever arises in our life. It comes right back to the basics of the Four Noble Truths. So when the Buddha talked about dukkha as the thing to really notice when it's there, it's because that's the flashing light that says, okay, there's something for me to take care of here. Something to bring more awareness to, something to bring more kindness to, more generosity. And when we do that, and we look at, well, what is this based on? Where does it come from? It's not enough to just say, oh, I'm attached to something. It's too glib. It doesn't really do the job, I don't think, usually. But it's more directly nuanced and contextual than that. When we're able to unpack that somewhat, bring it into the open, then we can start to understand what it is that we can do for ourselves, being that, sustaining that favorable relationship with ourselves. What does my heart need? What does my mind need in order to really let go, feel that relief, feel that confidence, trust in our wisdom, trust in our virtue, trust in our efforts, and trust in each other. I think I'll close it there.
Thank you. We have about, maybe we could do about 10 minutes of questions, and then we'll share a meal. And then after the meal, there'll be opportunity for a bit more Q&A with each other as well. Maybe 10 to 15 minutes, maybe, questions, something like that. Yeah, so 15 minutes of questions right now. And then afterwards, there'll be a bit more time. And if you want to ask a question, I think it'd be a little too much to run the mic around, but just speak up, maybe say your name as well. And then we could repeat the question for the, oh, actually, that's a good idea.
So, any questions? Yeah. Do we want to send the mic? Okay, we'll just repeat it.
Thank you for the teaching and for the invitation to talk about things that bother us or something we're constantly. My question is just that I noticed in the front friends that I have in the community that we all still have places where we don't treat people well. Maybe a husband doesn't treat us, is just sort of irritable or not generous with his wife. And in my case, I get really irritated with my mom really easily, and I think of her okay, but when I'm with her, I treat her less than I would expect that I would want to. I'm just wondering if you have advice on like listening to all the I've listened to tons of teachings. It resonates. It feels like it's wholesome compliments, and I still act selfish
Yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah, I think the question, to just kind of pare it down, let me know if I get it enough. You know, we want to be kind and generous, and sometimes we're not. Sometimes we get really irritated. And what do we do about that? When we feel irritable, especially with someone we care about very deeply, maybe. And I can say that I definitely experienced this a lot with my mother. And I would get impatient with her and say things that I didn't really want to say, and I'd walk away feeling, bad about myself. How could I be like this with my mom? But it was a challenging relationship, and what I notice about irritation is there's something to ask ourselves: what is it that I want to have be different than it is? There's something happening here that I don't want to be this way. And with my mom, she was starting to get dementia. I really wanted her to be my mom, like the normal mom. She was so supportive, right? I didn't want her to be losing it. And I had to face that. I had to recognize that I needed to develop more patience and accept where she was. It may be different for you, but to look at what is it, there's something here. If I'm unhappy, if I'm irritable, if I'm experiencing dukkha, there's something happening that I don't want to have be this way. What is it? And when we can acknowledge what it is, we can identify what it is. How do I want it to be? And then I can accept it's not, but that's not how it is. This is how it is. So if you've listened to Ajahn Sumedho, his voice rings in my head when it's like, this is the way it is. It's not this other way. And also, that I might discover, and I have many times, that there's something in myself that I'm not being the way I want to be. And I have to first go, okay, this is the way I'm being. This is what is happening. I get triggered. So sometimes, especially toward the end of her life, I stayed with her when she was going through the dying process. And still, I could anticipate, when this happens, this is what she's going to say, and this is the horrible feeling that's going to come up in me, and this is how I'm going to handle it. And that helped a lot, to just be ready. Because in those relationships that were so close, those things happen over and over again. And, it's a great training ground for us to change our pattern in these situations, because this is what helps us change our pattern in the way we think and the way we practice. We're not going to be the way we are right now once we're enlightened. If we're going to get enlightened, we're going to have to change. And some of the things that we have to change are really fundamental, like just the way we perceive things. And so this is a great training ground. And it's also important not to be too hard on yourself as you're making this shift. Just look for the improvement and encourage yourself with that. Like if you go through one of those episodes where the thing gets said that would cause you to react in a certain way, and then you don't, you go, wow, that was great, I did it. I got through that whole visit without doing that thing. Yeah. Thank you. Other questions for anyone here? Yes. Yes.
So, about this maintaining a relationship with yourself. During meditation, I found I could settle in easily, and at a certain point, another was arising, and the plane flew overhead. Maybe I'll be safe. Maybe have a good day. The next one, the plane flew. Maybe have a good day. The next one, it was hard.
Oh.
So, how to this right effort, how to maintain an internal state of kindness
Mm-hmm.
with yourself, and I think the wisdom of knowing when is a good time to make action and when not to, just unravel that for me.
Yeah, these are good questions. How to maintain kindness, how to know when to take action and when not to. These are very good questions. The example given is the airplanes going overhead and, just calmly meditating and wishing them well and may they arrive safely, and then 30 seconds, 15 seconds later, the next plane goes over and it's like, I wish you well. And another 10 seconds later, the next plane is like, close enough. How do you maintain the patience, the generosity? And I think the first thing, the thing we have to do is, as soon as we catch the shift in our mood, in our perception, in our feeling, to acknowledge it. And I use this kind of gesture of like putting my hand out in front and you hold it out here in front of you. It's like, oh, there's irritation. Come here, irritation. Where I can look at you and bring some kindness to that reality that I have these limits and it's okay. Or right now, this is like sometime we might be able to sit through 15 planes going overhead and it's nothing, but maybe today it's not like that, and that's okay. But then when we recognize the irritation is there, or whatever flavor of feeling it is, you recognize that it's there, and then you're seeing it not as me or mine, but as a phenomenon that's occurring. And then we can really bring mindfulness to it, asking questions about it. Where does that arise in my body? What else do I remember about this feeling in my history? Those kinds of things. And, when to take action and when not to take action is a really good question. When we say action, it's like, when, I think we could think of it on a couple levels. When do I really make this an object of my attention? And when do I just kind of like try to let it go? So you can try to let it go first. First you acknowledge, okay, I'm starting to get irritated by the noise or whatever, and then noticing it and bringing yourself back. Maybe that's enough. It's kind of like the sutta where the Buddha talks about the removal of distracting thoughts. He gives like 5 methods. He says, well, and then if that doesn't work, then you do this. And if that doesn't work, then you do this. And it's along these lines of, first you try to replace what you're thinking with something wholesome, and then you try to ignore it, and then you try to look deeper at the basis of it, what's behind it, and so on. So it's a little like that. You can try to not do anything, at first and see if that's enough. But then when we really are when we're really grappling with things that are deeply painful or recurring, then this method of really examining it, this is really the first three noble truths, the method of noticing the dukkha and examining what that's about. And there are various ways of doing it. And you can actually get to the cessation of that dukkha just through that investigation. But the most effective way I've found is by really locating the feeling that's associated with it in the body and observing it there. Now, the other level of when do you do things and when do you not do things, I think is more on the external action. Like, how much do we simply endure? When do you endure, and when do you say something or do something to change the situation? And it's a lot of it has to do with how much good can I do by taking action externally? You know, is it really possible to help the situation? And at the same time, I need to take action internally so that I can come to peace with whatever it is, not be attached or expecting some kind of outcome of whatever action I take. And then, you know, when we take whatever action we can take, and it doesn't go the direction we want to, the Buddha says at that point, you say, the karma is really strong. Now what can I do? So you accept it. You can't change it, you accept it. And then you see what it is you can do. Because really, if you think about it, there's always something we can do. I remember Ajahn Pasano one time saying, there's always something that you can do to be generous. Generosity, because you can be generous even in your thoughts. So if you think about that, there's always an opportunity to do something. And then that's what you do. Does anyone have any questions for them?
We get you both so rarely. I think we have time for one more.
One more question? Anyone? Yes.
I think you touched on it the other day. My name's Jason.
Hi, Jason.
I find that one of my biggest sources of dukkha are the roles that I work, the roles that I own, you know, as a, let's say, as a father, or as someone at work. I find that there's an identification with and having to sustain that role and be working in that way, whether it's setting boundaries and holding accountability. It's very painful. It's a source of dukkha for me, especially raising what we call star children, children with difficulties, right? I was hoping maybe you could speak a little about, I think you have already, but holding those responsibilities and those roles in light of
Yeah, so the question is about the roles that we play, whether it's parenting or maybe a work role. You know, if you're the manager, you know, how do you hold that in a way that has compassion and maybe more lightly This is something you see in the monastery. You'll have someone, they enter the robes and they're part of the community and they're really great community member, and then they get a little more seniority and a little more seniority, and then they become the work monastic, and suddenly they're a holy terror because now they have this responsibility, this role, and they're trying to do it, and maybe they don't have much training in how to do that, right? And it can be rough on everyone. And this is an opportunity to look at who do we think we are, and how do we separate our sense of identity from the role, and see how we can fulfill the role that we've taken responsibility for, without being so identified with it that we can't see when to make changes, for example, something like that. Because if we're too identified with the role, then, and we're taking things personally, we get all wrapped up in it. But if we can see that this role, like everything else that I think is me or mine, is actually not. It's just a process. And hopefully I can use this role, this identification, identifying like what a certain role is, like, being the work nun or the abbess or the co-abbess or the whatever, trying to avoid believing what other people think of you in that role, taking in their feedback and making use of it. And I don't mean like dismissing everything, but to not let that be defining you. So what I mean by that is, like, for example, when spiritual teachers start identifying with the gratification that students might give them, they're in trouble. And even as a parent, being the mom, there are some things that I'm absolutely responsible for. So I have 2 kids. But if I get into trying to be the perfect mom, it doesn't do anybody any good. If I can just see it more as, okay, how can I support them? How can I be kind to myself and to them, and to recognize that this is an unfolding process. A job that's so complicated, I'm never going to be able to make the right decision every time. It's appreciating the complexity of any of these roles. The work monk, it's a complicated job. You're not going to make the right decision or say the right thing every time. If we can bring that kind of humility to the whole thing, I think when the kids are old enough and you can share with them without making them feel unsafe or worried at all, but to share with them the process of making certain decisions, to help them understand that it's not like any of us ever are flawless, or there's not just one wonderfully neat, pat, right answer. So I think humility, and when I talked about loving the suttas, and a lot of it is, as a teacher of Dhamma, I don't have to, it's not my wisdom, it's the Buddha's wisdom that I rely on. It's like we can We can look at the principles of Dhamma as our basis, whether we're parenting or managing or whatever we're doing. Um, and that's the ground that gives the confidence to know how to address things. And so that's what I would say, look to a deeper source. The Dhamma's there available to everybody, and regardless of religious tradition, actually. So it's like, if we can ground our decisions in that and monitor our ego involvement in whatever it is, so that we can, step outside of that. Yeah. Thank you.